welcome back. Since we were talking about health a moment ago, just to note that the World Health Organization in its latest update is urging on countries experiencing heat waves. It might not be the situation in most parts of Cameroon now. Extreme temperatures should stay safe, and they gave a few tips on helping people stay out of the extreme weather conditions. Avoid going outside during the hottest time of the day. If you go outside, wear a hat, sunglasses and sunscreen. Avoid touching too much physical activity if you can, or do it during the coolest part of the day. In some parts of the world, people, especially in the Sahel regions, people actually open their businesses at night. Stay in the shade. Do not leave children or animals in parked vehicles. Drink lots of water, and if you feel dizzy, weak or anxious, very thirsty, and have headaches during a heat wave, move to a cool place as soon as possible and drink lots of fluids such as water or fruit juice to rehydrate. It's almost a coincidence that we're going to be talking sciences, and we are in the company of a doctor, Professor Mbacham Wilfred. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you very much.
I didn't plan to talk about cholera in the first part of the show, and I honestly didn't plan to talk about the heat wave, but since you're here, maybe you could react. Hearing that we have occasional outbreaks of cholera, is it disturbing to you, considering the nature of the disease?
Well, in a way it's disturbing, because you'd want to imagine that when Corona came and went, we should have gotten into the practice of WASH, which is water hygiene and sanitation, practicing those barrier measures, and in a way, curbing that. I don't know if you know, but also the coronavirus was also mostly spread through the anus, because a lot of it was shed in the human waste matter. And so washing your hands, getting out of toilet, should have made us develop automatically a habit that would keep us clean and safe. But you still find once in a while that cholera sneaks in and takes a toll on the population, and I hope that the public health measures that have been put in place would be able to contain it before it spreads too far.
Okay, for those who might be meeting a professor for the first time, he is a public health biotechnology specialist. He studied molecular parasitology here in Yaoundé 1, and also studied tropical public health in Harvard. And he researches on host and pathogen genomic and the interaction between communicable and non-communicable diseases. He's investigating a number of comorbidities with inflammation as a unifying theme of these diseases: diabetes, malaria, diabetes, TB, amongst others. We'll talk about those in a moment, but let's focus our attention a little bit on this event that took place at the start of the week, the Science Week, initiated by the Ministry of Scientific Research, and which I understand was staged at the University of Yaoundé 1. What is the Science Week for somebody who has no clue?
Well, the Science Week actually was occasioned by the Cameroon Academy of Science, whose secretariat is at the Ministry of Scientific Research and Innovation. And this week was meant to showcase what Cameroon's scientists could do, both those in the social sciences, but also those in the biological sciences and those in the mathematical and physical sciences. And the week in itself had workshops. It also had the sampling of a book on the strategies that could be put in place and how science could contribute in meeting up with a national strategic development plan for 2030-2035. And so this was what the week was sampling. We also had the induction of new fellows into the Cameroon Academy of Science, and this is all that we were celebrating throughout this week.
Well, how does this help foster the practice of science, especially when it comes to students?
Well, most often when you tell students to get into STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, sometimes they can't lay hands on exactly what that means. And so during the Science Week, we're able to demonstrate, how practical this can be. And I think that demonstration this week by the Cameroon Academy of Sciences actually was trying to take the National Strategic Development Plan and showing practically what could be done. Now, you want to know that that, anybody who gets into STEM should be talking about issues that directly relate to development. Now, which are the pillars of development? It's science, it's health, it's wealth, and it's society. Now, when you take those and you merge those with the new disciplines that are coming up, for example, information technology, material science, the biological science, and the numerical sciences, now the intersection between these development pillars and these new disciplines creates new avenues in which we can actually locate and foster development. And so this is what we were trying to demonstrate during the Science Week.
Well, I wasn't definitely a good science student in school. That's why I'm sitting here now. But if we talk about the practical demonstrations, could you give us a few examples? I remember arriving at Seoul, and one of the lasting images that stayed with me was a kid on a bike riding, and behind him there was a blender, and each time he finished riding, he stepped down and he received a glass of juice. Actually, the pedal was linked to a dynamo that was juicing at the same time. And I told myself, maybe if I had seen something like this while I was younger, I would actually love sciences and I want to do it and know more about it. So, are there practical examples that can trigger, if you care, that interest and that passion?
Effectively, I think quite a few young scientists have been able to demonstrate. For example, during the week, or we have a Cameroon Academy of Young Scientists who are able to make these little demonstrations. But sometime last year, there was an international fair for young African scientists called IFIA that held at EcoPark. And this was trying to make those demonstrations, practical demonstrations on what science could actually do in terms of, little gadgets, play tools, and play instruments. And that triggered an interest. And we had a number of secondary and high school students visiting, and I think that might have sparked their interest also into science. And this is what we're hoping, that many more of such science fairs would take place and be able to trigger that desire in students to do that. Sometimes when you hear science, the tendency is that, this is something for the laboratory and that, but science is anything that uses the scientific method in trying to look for a solution. So when you get into your car in the morning and you actually start the car and it doesn't start, you're making the observation that the car cannot start. Now, the first thing you do is that you put up a hypothesis, or you think that it might be the battery or the fuel that is not in order, or some electrical problem. Now you're putting up a hypothesis. You experiment by actually starting it again, or by trying to push the car and jump start it. Now that's experimentation. Then when you get to the stage of concluding that, it was the Kickstarter and you needed some kind of a mechanic, you're now looking for the solutions and looking for other people who could make that contribution. At the end of the day, you've just employed the scientific method. It was the same with King Solomon. When he decided that this lady was the one to whom the child belonged, and that was purely the scientific method. And so he was employing, certain tenets and principles of science.
Okay, as a renowned scientist, we have no doubt at all of your contribution and your work. I have a long list that I have trouble going through. But as a renowned scientist in Cameroon, where do you rank Cameroonian science?
Well, I think the Cameroon scientists are some of the best in the world. We don't see them here, we don't feel them here, but when you go internationally and see what Cameroon is able to demonstrate, then you have a sense that Cameroon's educational system is top ranking. I'll give you one clear example. Dr. Kengasong studied all along in Cameroon before he went abroad. And that's a product. If he didn't perform well here and he didn't make the mark here, he would never have had the chance to go abroad. And because he was so well trained here, he's excelled. That foundation was particularly important throughout his other further education. It was the same. My going to Harvard did not help make me more intelligent. It just broadened my horizon, and my basic training was at University of Yaoundé 1, and I think that my coming back was effectively to transfer the expertise and the know-how on how I was able to cope with the difficult situation, so that the youngsters can know that Cameroon's educational system is top-notch in the world.
Well, you're praising the educational system. do you feel that we're doing enough insofar as promoting these STEM courses are concerned? The reason I'm saying so is because increasingly we have the feeling that the competition of the future is actually knowledge-based, and it all revolves around ICTs and science.
Actually, speaking about that, I think that there is so much that is being done, and I think I want to praise the Ministry of Higher Education for democratizing science education. And I say so because the field was left for those who could promote issues in science and education, and I think we've seen a few. We've seen the ICT University, we've also seen the St. Louis Institute, we've also seen the Fabang Institutes, which are trying as much as possible not only to bring the applications of science to development, but looking also at issues of the fundamentals. What are the principles that underlie this? Why? Because you don't want to start and run into a problem and then you start subscribing to the West for solutions that you could have solved originally. So I think that things that ICT is doing, things that Finis Tech is doing, things that St. Louis Institute are doing, I think these things will ultimately materialize into something that can be palpable, and you'll see a lot of inventions come soon.
I'm going to insist on that.
Okay.
Are we targeting these courses? Do you feel that there is an intentional policy of promoting or orienting kids towards these courses, considering how strategic they are, when we come to the global marketplace?
Yes, I would say so, because when I looked at the higher education arena and decided to enter also as a promoter of higher education, I looked at the fields that were being taught and were being advertised, and I saw exactly what the ICT University had done. I also looked at what St. Louis Institute had done. They were more into the applications of science. Then I went to the curriculum that the ministry had developed and discovered that there are some disciplines in which no institute, not even the government institutes, had even as much as offered these. Things in bioengineering, things in food, agricultural biotechnology, not agricultural production. So we took all of these and then fashioned them into well-designed courses for HND, and now we're getting the universities of Boya and universities of Yaoundé to endorse these programs so that we can foster these aspects. Now, why is this being done? Because there are two questions that are usually asked in science. The first of them is it of fundamental nature? So you're looking at the basics and principles, and the answers can be yes or no. Then the other question is it of applied nature? And again, the answers can be yes or no. Now, when you intersect the yeses and nos to these two questions, you get 4 quadrants. Now, the best of the quadrants is that where it is yes for fundamental understanding and yes for application, and that's where Africa should lodge. Now, this is called the Pasteur's quadrant. And this is where Africa should lodge. Now, the other quadrants can be those of very fundamental nature, or principles without any application, or complete applications without any understanding of the fundamental nature. That's Edison's, the guy who discovered the light bulb, made 10,000 trials because he didn't understand the principles, and ultimately got the 10,001st trial to work. But Bohr understood how electrons went, had no applications for it. The other one is it's a hobby, where there's no application and there's no fundamental nature. So it's like bird watching. So basically, I think that the institutes that are now creeping up are actually trying to address this this notion that we should always lodge within Pasteur's quadrant.
Okay, interesting. If you were to give advice to maybe our higher education policymakers or even private sector educationists, what would you recommend? What more can be done?
Well, I recommend that they should look at the pillars of development that the African Union has defined. They should look at what the pillars of development which the African Development Bank is willing to put in money for. They should look at what the Islamic Development Bank is willing to put in money for, and that would define exactly how things are tending, the tendencies that would foster development. And I think if the people of higher education start to look at this and know that knowledge in itself is an economy, then we would start to see certain gains in exactly what we're doing. And I think that the Ministry of Higher Education understands this. You would notice that there's been a complete shift in how students are trained. Now they're trained in the secondary and high schools based on competencies, and higher education is beginning to take that up, because what they had defined some 15 years ago was to create free trade zones within the university environments where you could have startups, where you could have incubators, and I think that that's beginning to happen. We've seen the clear example of Silicon Mountain in Boya, where a group of institutions, by finding themselves have generated this impetus in young people, and they have done things that have been sold around the world.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. I intend to ask your opinion on PISA testing, and for example, see if Africa could emulate things like that in order to start whipping up this passion from a very tender age. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, I'll continue this conversation on the benefits of Science Week with Professor Mbacham. Welcome. You're watching Twilight on CRTV News. It's a daily news analysis show every day of the week, Mondays to Fridays, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. A little before the prime newscasts. We identify some of the running stories of the day, and we focus your attention on them by bringing in some of the newsmakers to help us break them down. On weekends, we offer you a cultural twist on Shenule's Artist, which is a kind of cultural version of the same show. And on Sundays, Omni's Core, which is our sports melting pot, similar debate panel where we bring in the newsmakers and the key actors to help us figure out what is going on. So you're on CRTV News. You can connect to us on channel 306 on the Canalsat Bouquet, and you will always have a rebroadcast of this show at about 10:30 p.m. and 1 13 the next day. And with Professor Wilfred Mbacham, who is a renowned scientist in Cameroon. He has served in leadership positions in many national and international programs. He is the executive director of the Multilateral Initiative on Malaria that promotes fundamental research on malaria, but he also organizes a 2,000-person capacity conference every 4 years. For 10 years, he's also coordinated the APAP, Assise Pan-Africaine de lutte contre le paludisme, that brought together 35 national malaria control program managers from Anglophone, Lusophone and Francophone Africa to discuss and exchange strategies for success in rolling out various anti-malaria interventions. So this is a scientist at heart, with whom we're having a conversation on the benefits of Science Week. China, Singapore, Macau, Hong Kong, Taiwan are the top 5 in PISA testing. PISA measures the ability of 15-year-olds to use their reading, mathematics, and science knowledge to solve real-life problems. What do you make of such tests?
Well, I think it's good, especially when it starts at a very young age, to trigger that desire to solve those problems. Again, this is the competency-based approach, where you try to have your knowledge and then use that knowledge in problem solving, it's a good thing. But I think, especially for our own setting, we need to go beyond, the PISA testing methods. Why do I say so? Because the PISA would virtually test the IQ of the student. Now, that's not all there is in life. There's also the emotional part. So you have to also see and develop the emotional quotient of the student. Why? Because you need this kind of a balance. Actually, if you have a 4 and 4 GPA, Harvard will not take you in because they think that you're not balanced. So you need to know and have
genius.
Exactly. You need to have that balance in life. And if you look at our high school friends, you look at our secondary school friends, those who are very sharp haven't gone too far because they've not been able to balance the emotional quotients. And there are ways in which this can be measured. There are ways in which these can be developed, because that's when you actually live and solve problems that hit you on a daily basis. If you do not smoosh, you do not have friends, you do not have people on whom you can rely and create your networks, your knowledge is not going to go too far. So yes, I agree that PISA testing methods are good. They demonstrate your IQ, but the problem-solving approaches need to be heightened by letting students acquire and heighten their emotional quotients.
For the purpose of the debate, if there is no intelligence, I'm not sure the emotional quotient is very useful. So the reason I'm saying this is I am convinced that most kids actually give up on science courses early on in their academic careers, either because some teacher made them think mathematics was something absurd, or that factors and integrals were something intangible, and there was the pedagogic method, there was no way of making them relate to these issues, and so they disconnected from those courses. It doesn't make them dull kids, and that's where I buy your point totally, but at the same time, if they don't score certain marks early on, we wouldn't get to the stage where their EQ comes into play and where they are in leadership positions.
I think I want to agree with you totally as well, and to say that, if you're going to be intelligent IQ-wise, that should ultimately lead you EQ-wise. And why do I say so? I say so because if they bring up social skills, if they bring up things that you're supposed to acquire socially to be stable and not give up and not break down when you're faced with a difficulty, then if you do not have that intelligence to acquire those other skills, then your IQ would not help you very much. And I think that slowly, in the schools nowadays, it's just that the teachers who teach the teachers that go to teach our kids don't have a mastery of what this competency-based approach is, and everybody is doing it in their own way. So I think that if the basic education, secondary education, and technical education can start to really formalize this and then transfer that to those who are in the universities, then we'll start to see some changes on exactly how to strike this balance. I tell you, in the universities, no teacher is trained to teach. We teach like our best professors also taught us. That's not the way to teach. We never make good lesson notes, and therefore, if university lecturers can even be trained in pedagogy and evaluation, and then to given this approach of competency-based, I think that we're going to see better things that will happen, because the competency-based starts off with a problem. And then you're allowed to use your knowledge to try to solve that problem. In trying to solve the problem, now they introduce different principles that guide the solution. And I think that's what we need at this stage, especially in Cameroon, that's a developing nation.
What for you is a good teacher?
That's a good one. It's somebody who can listen. It's somebody who is humble, who can accept that he doesn't know everything, and that if a question is challenging, rather than lie, because the students would remember the lie, he should go back and do the research and come back and admit that he didn't know the answer, but this is the answer, and explain to them what the answer actually means. This, for me, would be a good teacher. Just saying the truth and saying it in the most simple way possible, such that the kids can pick it up, and if he doesn't know, he should admit that he doesn't know, and then bring the right solutions rather than lie.
Now, would you agree that most teachers don't have the demonstrations sufficient to make their kids visualize what they are trying to transmit to them?
Yes, and that's unfortunate. Unfortunate, why? Because nowadays with the technology, you can have all those things. You can go to the internet, you can see visual three-dimensional pictures, you can see animated lessons, you can pick those up, and if there are things that you yourself do not understand, you can understand them and then bring them to the students. You do not have to lie, you do not have to imagine things anymore, because things are in 3D. Not only that, now there's virtual reality that is coming into play. I could virtually look with goggles, I could look into a spectacle and virtually see your internal body and be able to see exactly things that are happening. Actually, medicine is tending towards that way, because subsequently you come to the physician and he will put on this device, and with the chip from you, we'll insert it into that device, and we're able to see your entire internal organs and see exactly how they're functioning, to be able to pinpoint what is wrong with some of them and be able to bring you adequate solutions. So I think that medicine is being revolutionized, and this alternate reality and virtual space is taking center hall. And the earlier the pre.com generation, which is our generation, starts to align with these new technologies, I think that is going to improve, because we have gathered the fundamentals, we've mastered those, but it is time for us to take on these alternate realities and then know exactly how they function, and then to make our lessons become live and then bring them, so that kids nowadays can palpate and be able to relate to the science and all the technologies that they're doing. If you don't do this, they themselves will go find out and they will challenge you. And I think that this is an open call for all the teachers, whether you're in the university or whether you're in secondary school or technical school. It's to go in, to get in touch with these alternate reality technologies and to understand exactly how they work, and then bring them to explain your lessons.
Well, I'm one of those who actually feels that we cannot afford not to factor in the internet and every opportunity that it brings, because I feel like it's actually a shortcut for us to achieve some of the things that we otherwise wouldn't even have access to. But well, that said, do you feel that the Cameroon Academy of Sciences is doing what we kind of reproach to most scientists on the continent? Are they addressing local development challenges? Are they encouraging people to work in fields that affect us as Africans and as Cameroonians?
Well, yes, I think if you were present at the Cameroon Academy of Science Week, you would have seen this happen. And I will take one very clear example of something that hit us like a thunderbolt recently, the COVID situation. Now, everybody's wondering exactly what did happen that Africans didn't die as much. We did die as many, like in Europe, but the age group, the age differences within the African population made the shift. We not feel it because it was hitting the more aged population. But when you look at the solutions that Africans had to develop to cope with the pandemic, then we realized that a lot of our local pharmacopoeia were harnessed in trying to deal with this. And these coping mechanisms, I just wish we can have that compendium of what the Cameroon Academy of Science did. and to bring it together. And there was a day symposium where all the technicalities and all that people were able to do in coping with the AIDS pandemic based on our local herbal medications and based on our local foods were brought together and demonstrated what utility they were. Actually, from those, Western nations, Western scientists have come in and have taken some of this to be able to patent them. And I can tell you of some of the discoveries that Professor Oben did. I can tell you of those that Professor Titanji did. I can tell you of those that happened in IMPM with also people like Cleda, whose medications were able to evaluate and show that there are added values with Professor Dr. Yulosh Nyanyinyi, and to show that all of these are coming with added value to the Western protocol. Now these are local technologies that people were able to do practically and bring solutions to something that hit us locally. And I think that was a startling stance and move by the intelligentsia in Cameroon, and it's something that needs to be encouraged.
Do they document?
Yes, it has been documented now.
Okay.
And we have books. There was a first book that, Is It a Myth or Reality, that our local pharmacopoeia could actually do, and that was done by the EcoPac Foundation and the Fobank Foundation, and they were able to bring together 12 scientists and literary people who were able to demonstrate that even the 1918 solution for the Spanish flu came out of Cameroon. And so together with that, they were able to show during the Science Week, again, this information that these strategies were also brought together in a book, and I think that that book is made available, especially because it addresses other aspects of the National Strategic Development Plan and the practical solutions, both in IT, both in mathematics modeling, both in the physical sciences, both in climate change, and also the biological sciences, non-communicable and communicable diseases, as well as the response to the COVID pandemic. All of these are compended in the book for the CAS Week 2022.
What are the expected outcomes of the Science Week?
The Science Week has demonstrated exactly what science can do to foster development. And I think the scientists that attended that week went back quite satisfied. There were so many questions that were asked, and all the medical doctors, the biological scientists, the physical scientists gave their opinions on different things and different solutions to the issues that were in front of them. And I think that demonstrated to the young scientists who were present in the hall how you could use science in solving contemporary problems, but it also brought for other scientists who were already matured in their careers alternate solutions. And I think that this kind of a scientific jamboree is something that needs to be encouraged. We need to hold it more often. The Cameroon Academy of Science has colleges. These colleges need to organize such activities many times in 1 year before they come back again for a general assembly and for a science week.
If you were talking to a young debutant or somebody who dreams of pursuing a career in science, what would you tell them? What do they need to do to succeed, and why should they even do it in the first place? Because I meet many kids who tell me, I want to be a customs officer, or I want to go to ENAM. You know, how do you sell the whole doctor dream all over again, even if it's not medicine? You know, the whole science dream to kids.
Okay. Well, the first thing I would tell them is that I would ask them, I said, look at myself. I did not study abroad, although I had the chance of having a northern exposure. All of my education was based here in Cameroon. And during that time, during my youthful age, I burned the late night candle to acquire the basics, and then later on many other things were added onto that. And so they need to know the fundamentals and read. They shouldn't take the shortcuts of rushing to their phones when a question is asked. They need to reason it out, deconstruct the question, and then reconstruct it to obtain the basic solutions. The internet will always be there. We don't even have libraries. We had to travel to Europe to consult some of the books and documentations. They now have the libraries at their beck and call. And so therefore there's every reason why they should apply themselves and read and read and read. You cannot achieve without studying, and once you study and you master, now I can go into different study methods, but that's not my the role for this question here. All I need to say is that they need to read and instruct themselves on exactly what the tenets of science are, what the principles are, and then later on they can always apply those to whatever they want as solutions to contemporary problems in life.
Well, thank you very much, Prof, for joining us on this set and for helping to spark the scientific light once more in the hearts of young generations of Cameroonians or Africans who might be watching us. We can only say good luck in all of your endeavors, and let's hope that the future scientists and the current researchers help Africa solve some of its development challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. If you've been watching us, I'm with Professor Wilfred Mbacham, who has been talking to me a little bit about the initiative of Cameroon to organize a scientific week. Just to remind the viewers that at the initiative of His Excellency Paul Biya, President of the Republic of Cameroon, His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic, will pay an official visit to Cameroon from the 25th to the 27th of July 2022. This press release is signed Samuel Mvondo Ayolo, Minister Director of the Civil Cabinet. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be focusing your attention on our next newscast.